Hey, how are you doing?
How's it going? Very
Good.
nice to see you again.
Likewise. I really like the movie. Have to
Thank
start
you
with
very
that.
much.
Yeah, really felt like it was a feel-good movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Of
Um,
which we need a little bit of that these days.
yes, truer words have not been spoken.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
and so I wanted to begin at the beginning. And kind of like I've read a bit about how this whole project came about and how you were introduced to the crew group. But if you wanted to share a bit about how you got in touch with them and what kind of sparked the interest and idea to make this
Sure,
movie.
sure. Well, my name is Sherief ElKatsha, and I'm the director of the film. I was working before I started this. I guess it was, I won't even say the date, but it was a few years ago. And I was working on a film about migration. And I couldn't really, I wasn't, when you're just not finding the characters you want or the storyline you want. And the subject was so big.
Right.
And I was invited by a friend of mine to come to Aswan, to Upper Egypt, and to help him on a photo shoot with the Nile Project. And I said, sure, no problem. I've worked on plenty of photo shoots. So I went to Aswan and met the group. And that's when I just sort of fell in love. Instantly dropped I didn't know initially that I was going to make this film, but I just really was enamored with the whole group and the way they worked together and the way sort of through differences they could find this strength. Um, and to me, it just, instantly I just thought, well, this is kind of has everything I've been looking for. Um, and it's all in this localized in this one group called the Nile Project. So there was a crew at the time that was filming a documentary. They were a Spanish crew, and I remember that every time they were around, the musicians were a little bit scared, and there was a language barrier, and they didn't speak the same language. And I kept thinking, damn it, I should be making this film. So whenever the Spanish crew took a break, I luckily had my camera, and I just sort of started filming. Again, not knowing to what end, but just thought I have to be filming this.
Right.
Um, and then the CEO of the project, Mina Girgis, let me know that they got a tour throughout the United States, and that's when I decided that okay, this is a great opportunity for me to try to make this film, and I would travel with them for 4 months and try to be a band member,
Right.
not knowing where it would, what would happen. And so that's kind of how it began.
Because at this time you were still based. You've since moved back to Egypt, I know, but
Yeah,
back then you were still based in the States, right?
exactly. I was based in the United States, and you know, uh, it was just sort of like Trump had recently been elected. And I thought, okay, here's an opportunity. It probably wouldn't have been my first choice to have shot it in the United States, but as it is with documentaries, you get a call saying this is our tour. It's 4 months, and I thought, okay, perfect. I'm going to jump on board.
Was this not also around the time that he introduced the Muslim ban? Like, how did that work with visa?
Exactly. So the
Yeah.
travel ban was definitely a big part of my film initially.
Right.
And it was all very tied into Trump. And I think it wasn't until a few years ago in the editing room when we actually looked at the footage we had and thought about whether or not we wanted to push this idea of Trump and the travel ban. And
I
we decided ultimately, my editor and I, Pierre Abarer, that we really didn't want to mention it at all. And that, 10 years from now, the travel ban, who's going to remember the travel ban? But I really thought that this story was very much in the future and not in the past. And I didn't want anyone to look at it and to say, oh, that's dated. That's when Trump was. Oh, remember the travel ban.
right.
But it was a part of it. But at the end of the day, you know, it could have been that tour could have been anywhere. It could have
Right.
been in Europe. And I think it's more about this insular bubble of
Right.
this group moving around on tour, which I had never, not being a musician, I had never been on tour. So this was my first time.
I have toured with bands. And that's what I loved about the movie.
Yeah.
It kind of like brought me back to that period, even though I don't miss it.
Yeah.
But
No, it's very intense. I mean, personalities getting along on tour is intense to begin with.
yes,
And then when you have 12 different people from sort of underrepresented,
right.
places in Africa, and none of them could, they were all foreigners in a new land. And at the same time, they're dealing with these sort of internal struggles of just trying to be on the same page.
Yeah, definitely. The touring experience is definitely one that brings you closer together than almost anything. It creates a bond that's like kind of unshakable, but it is a challenge to say the least.
Yeah, can also kill you.
Right. And so I was personally introduced to your work through Cairo Drive that was released in 2013. It's like for those who don't know, it's a portrait of Cairo, which I think was filmed over several years, right? Correct?
Yeah, it takes me a long time to make movies, it turns out. But that's what happens when you're a one-man band and you're just sort of trying to count your seashells and see how you're
Right.
going to pay for the next step in making a film.
Right.
But Cairo Drive took me 5 years, and then this took me 5 years as well.
Was this a one-man project as well? And how do you feel like that experience filming Cairo Drive, if at all, informed or influenced this film?
When I started this film, I really ignorantly thought that this was going to be a much easier process. And I thought, oh, the characters are all there.
Right.
The tour has a beginning, middle, and an end. How hard could it be? I seem to think that the film would be done in a year.
Okay.
But, and it perhaps could have been if I had the funding and if I had. So I was pretty much a solo one-man band, certainly throughout the shooting. And then I got some producers after from New York who helped put in some money. And, people often ask me, why did it take you so long? And the reality is, again, if you don't have money and you have an editor that you want to work with, you've kind of got to wait till his schedule is free. And at the same time, all of this happened during the pandemic. The pandemic happened. And initially we tried to edit remotely.
Right.
And realized that just wasn't going to happen. And it was a very tough time for me because I was really working on this film about people coming together.
Right.
And here we are in this point in history when it felt like maybe we're never going to come together again. And maybe we're all just going to live on Zooms. And so there was definitely the beginning of the pandemic. I kept thinking, what am I working on? Like, I'm all about collaboration and coming together and crossing borders. And here we were at this point in time when people were scared of our neighbors.
Yeah, very much. So, because most of these musicians, you met them all in Egypt. Do they also all reside there?
They reside, the musicians live in the 11 different countries along the Nile. They come in this every year because it's collective. Every year there's different musicians. And the makeup is a little different.
Right.
The year that I was on it, or the year that was in the film, there were, maybe 5 Egyptians. And then the rest came from Kenya, other countries.
Right. So they come together once a year to...
They come together once a year. And that was kind of what I thought was magical about it, was they really have to use this music as a common language.
Right.
And... but I walked into it initially, and I don't think, just because I was a one-man band and the way I work is it took me a long time to try to convince them, not to let them film them, but to just sort of tell them what I was doing and what the purpose and to gain their trust.
Right.
And that took, I think the entire tour, where I just decided I was going to be another band member and I was going to carry gear with them and I was going to rehearse till late at night and I wasn't going to leave and be a film crew. And it's also where I think the film benefited that it was just me. Right. Because at some point, everyone just sort of forgot that Sherief was around. They all had their musicians and Sherief had his camera, which was their instruments, And Sherief had his camera, which was sort of like his instrument. And they kind of paid me no mind.
Right. And it's
which
easier to immerse yourself in that experience in that way. Otherwise, it becomes like a whole sort of a set, basically. Yeah.
right. I didn't want a boom pole. I didn't want a sound guy. I just wanted to be as low key and as sort of unobtrusive. And I didn't want to interrupt their process, which already had all its challenges.
Right.
But definitely, because 4 or 5 of the musicians were Egyptian, I was at an advantage in that at least I could understand what they were saying.
Right.
And so I think I helped sort of as a cultural ambassador in between different musicians and just helping them.
Right.
I just think it's a really a spectacular group of people.
Yeah.
And I think that the project itself is very huge and forward thinking in what it's trying to do.
Right. Because what I found so interesting, you almost kind of fall in love with some of the characters. You really feel like you get to know them. And I was wondering if, because certain people are definitely pushed to the foreground, or at least maybe it naturally, turned out to be that way. So that's also a question I wanted to ask. Like, was this something you deliberately chose to do, or did you kind of like let it, evolve that way?
I think it was a combination of both things. I mean, there were certain musicians that, as much as they let me film, they just weren't interested in being filmed.
Right.
And they certainly didn't open up in front of the camera. And so I knew on tour, like, everyone would be, and again, 12 musicians plus crew members, that's a lot of characters.
Right.
So I knew that certain ones would sort of rise to the surface. And, Kasiva, upon meeting her, I knew instantly, like, oh, she's definitely, the camera loves her. She loves the camera. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But I definitely, I think it was just sort of certain people were more receptive to being filmed and certain others were not. And that was fine.
Right.
But I really didn't want it to be about any one of them. I really wanted it to be about this collaboration and the difficulty, or the challenges, I should say, of trying to work together when you come from different places and know different folks.
Are you still in touch with the members of the group?
Certainly. Yeah, with all of them. I feel a little guilty because now we're coming on a year since the film has premiered. And I would say there's maybe 5 musicians that have yet to see the film.
Oh, what was their reaction to the film in general?
Well, the ones that did see it, which were the ones that lived in Cairo, because I premiered at the Cairo Film Festival last October, pretty much exactly a year ago now. Right. And I remember, the lights dimmed, and at one point, Essia, the Sudanese woman, leaned over to me and said, what the hell are we about to watch? And I've never been more nervous in my life. It was definitely, it could have exploded in my face, because I decided they were all going to come to the Cairo Opera House and watch the film without having previewed it at all. Like, none of them had seen a minute.
Right.
So, thankfully, those that came all loved it. I mean, really, really loved it. And are very proud of the fact that, because the Nile Project existed for 5 years, and a lot of them feel that, like, because of this film, it's sort of it's locked into history somewhere.
Right.
Whereas the other 4 years, impactful shows, and they toured and the same thing. But, as the years go on, there's no record.
Right.
There's no film about it.
Right. Because you just mentioned that this premiered at the Cairo International Film Festival. I think that was around the same time that the COP27 took place, right? Around a lot of exciting events.
Yes, exactly the same time. And I really did feel, I'll just say my opinion is that I feel like there's a lot of issues in this film, none of which I wanted to delve too deep into.
Right.
But at the same point, I very much feel like I have an environmental film. I feel that so many of the problems that are facing this world today, the solution comes through working with people across borders that don't necessarily have much in common. So I thought it was beautiful that they all share the river, and that is something that they definitely, and I think upon being with each other, I think they realize that they are more similar than they are different.
Right.
the sort of universal humanity um, that seems to come through. And certainly sense of humor was part of that universal humanity, where a lot of people would crack jokes and were funny just as a survival technique, which is something we do in Egypt all the time.
It's
I
a
mean,
lot
when I
of it, yeah.
premiered in Cairo, they thought that I had they thought, first of all, they called it a docudrama because they thought that I had staged a lot of the fights.
Oh,
And they also thought that I had sort of put in comedic, I didn't
right,
as the large sort of jovial,
right.
like character. But
That's
they
not how I
thought that,
experienced it, though. I felt like it was naturally funny at moments where yeah,
yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah,
it was great because when they saw it, they of course couldn't remember any of it until they saw it. And then it brought back all the memories. And so when this guy said, comedic relief, Mija actually answered and said, we weren't trying to be funny. That was just us trying to get through the day and
right.
to get to the next day.
I feel like that's a common thread in your work as well, where certain things serve as a metaphor, which I felt with this movie as well. The idea of coming together, working on a project and finding collaboration despite differences. Cairo Drive was a kind of a metaphor for, I think, how Egypt works or doesn't work in
Certainly.
general.
Yes, yes, yes.
Do you feel like this has sort of sparked or encouraged conversation around the issues of the Nile Basin, or have you, was it also meant to affect change? How have you experienced that?
I think what I really wanted to do was step back a little bit, and I didn't want to get too much into the water issue, although that is something that the group um, talked about and they sort of gave lectures about. But I just thought the sort of in its core, everything comes down to people working together.
Right.
And I really believe that when it comes to, I mean, even in light of what we're facing these days and in all of but you just realize that there's different narratives. And whether we share borders or whether we share water or whether we share this planet that we all live on, any kind of drastic change in order to help us is going to take people working together. So to me, this was just a very sharp or a very concise metaphor. And the music, of course, is a metaphor for just really coming together. And I think that the music, when it hits and when it's right, it just, to me, it blew me away. I mean, I will say that 4 months of filming them and seeing the same songs performed almost every night, I never really got bored of it.
Well,
which to me was something to say for this outstanding talent that was on stage. And again, this great idea that the CEO, Mina Girgis, came up with.
And so moving forward, because I know you're back in Egypt now, and we just discussed the kind of common theme throughout your movies. I know you're working on a new project. I don't want to please don't give too much if you can't, but is that something that you'll continue doing moving forward? Does Egypt inspire you being back there?
Yeah, so I moved back in February, right after we premiered here, and that was the goal was to move back once I finished the film. So I was very proud that I finished the film, we premiered, and then I moved back. And I am very inspired being back in Cairo. I'm very happy to be out of New York, but it is a tense time in Cairo, and so I am sort of going very slow. And I know that there are a lot of things that people don't want talked about. And not that I want to do anything political but in its just by nature, I think pulling out a camera is somehow political.
Right.
And so I haven't, I'm taking it slow is what I'll say. And I'm definitely, in pre-production for a documentary, and at the same point I'm trying to write some fiction, and to pull it all together that way.
Well, I'm excited for one, so
that makes me very happy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and
thank you so much. Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Great. Bye.